Thank you so much for joining me here in the studio today, everyone. As you know, I'm Hika. I'm going to be chatting with you today a little bit about the Taylor Swift class. I'm really excited, so let's go ahead and could you guys please introduce yourselves one by one? I think we'll start with Dr. Cook. Just give me your full name, any preferred pronouns, and tell me what you do.
Hi, I'm Jessica Cook. My pronouns are she and her. I'm an associate professor of instruction at the USF Tampa campus in the English department.
My name is Michelle Taylor. My pronouns are also she, her, and I am also an associate professor of instruction at the USF Tampa campus in the English department.
My name is Emily Jones, she, her. I'm an associate professor in English also, and my regular specialty area is Renaissance literature.
Take me back to when this class first started, the idea. Was it always the idea to teach it together? What was the inception of this class like? If you want to, whoever wants to go ahead.
Yeah, so we were all, we're friends in real life, and we were out having a lunch together just to was it the end of the semester or was it summer?
It was August. It was right before the start of the semester. And we were eating Italian food and talking about Taylor Swift like we do.
Of course.
And we got into a conversation about the song Begin Again and its placement on the album Red. And it became a very sort of literary studies conversation because we're all English professors. We were kind of taking turns, talking about elements of the song, close reading it, sort of arguing for what we thought it was about based on small components of the lyrics. And after we'd been speaking together for a few minutes, one of us said, this is exactly the kind of thing that we try to teach our students to do. We could teach a class on Taylor Swift. And at the time, it wasn't exactly said seriously, but I think as soon as the words were out there in the air, we sort of let them sit for a second and we thought, we could teach a class on Taylor Swift. And no sooner did the possibility seem like a real possibility than we knew we wanted very badly to do it all together. Right. Both because it would allow us to teach more students, but also just because it was born from the three of us together. I think we work really well together. And so the big challenge was not really getting approval to teach the Swift class because it was easy to attach that to a class that we already offered in the English department. The challenge was finding a way to offer it as a team talk class in 3 separate sections. And so we're grateful to our chair and her assistant for helping us make that work. They were very helpful and they were on board the whole time.
Right. So I know you mentioned that you were talking about Taylor Swift at dinner. So I'm assuming that you all are fans. Tell me a little bit about your journey with Taylor Swift, your relationship with her, discography. When did you guys become fans? Yeah.
So I actually started listening to Taylor Swift fairly early in her career. The year I got my PhD here at USF, and I had moved from out of state, and I just remember listening to her album Fearless a lot that year. But I was kind of embarrassed by it because I was like, I am this adult woman in her late 20s. Why am I listening to this teenager sing these nostalgic songs about high school? Yeah. But I think particularly it was her song 15 about starting your first day of school and those new jitters. And I felt very much the same way, just starting my life over at a new school and in a new state. And so I just kind of was an undercover Taylor Swift listener for years. It was this was the days of the iPod and really age myself here. And they would be the songs on my iPod I'd probably be a little embarrassed about. Mm-hmm. And then around 1989, where she sort of exploded with popularity, I felt a little more capable of admitting my Taylor Swift love. But I wouldn't say I became a really big fan until probably the Lover album. And that's when I started to verge into Swiftie territory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Michelle, tell me about you.
Yeah, I don't think any of us called ourselves Swifties until, to bring our chair back into the conversation, we're going to have a meeting about the course and how to team teach it together. Uh-huh. And the team's meeting was called Swifties.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
our chair named it.
Yeah, and our chair named it that. And I remember messaging Emily and Jessica and being like, oh, we're the Swifties now. And I'd never called myself that before. And I was like, well, if my chair says I am, I guess that's what I am, especially if that's what it takes to teach the course. And I've never gone back from that. I think about Taylor Swift's about 50% of the time since I've been teaching this, I feel like. But I think it's funny that I didn't use that label until, 4 months ago or something?
Yeah.
But I'd been listening to her since her very first single came out. I was, I think, 18 or 19 when it first came out. I was just getting ready to go off to college.
Right.
But it wasn't until well into the 1989 era that I felt like I could roll my windows down in my car and play the music without feeling like people would judge me for it. And I remember my boss at one of my jobs was playing, I think the Bryan Adams 1989 re-recording in his office. And at that point I was like, oh, okay, I can do this now. Yeah. So I really like the idea that we're legitimizing the music and making it not that she needs legitimizing anymore, but I really like that we're doing that for something that a lot of people love that might feel like they shouldn't. And I wish someone had done that for me a lot earlier when we recognized the potential, for her, I think, as a poet and lyricist really early on.
Right. Yeah, I understand. And I, want you talking about when you first became a fan, when our song came out and debut came out, my first literal kind of running into with Taylor Swift was my dad and I was growing up in Australia at the time, and my dad and I were in the car and he used to come on the radio. So cool that we're here. But he used to come on the radio, and my dad loves Taylor Swift. And I remember thinking that he's such a cool dad, because even until now, in a time where there have been lots of opinions flying around, and as we talked about, sometimes we felt like it wasn't maybe acceptable, or we wish we had to closet the fact that we were Taylor Swift fans. In that time, my dad, and even until now, he's been so proud of Taylor Swift, and he loves her. He's so vocal about loving her. So our song was my first really running into with her, and I think that's so interesting. And I want to touch more about that aspect of kind of legitimizing being a Swiftie and calling yourself that. So with this class, when it was first proposed, the idea first came out, it was solidified. Was there any pushback at all? Were there any opinions of, maybe this isn't a class that should be taught, or things like that? Because we've run into that when it comes to just being a fan. So I was wondering how the reactions were when the idea of this class first came out.
For the most part, very positive. We did get a little bit of pushback from multiple directions, and some of it I think was actually helpful and generative critique. There was an article in the student newspaper, sort of a short opinion piece, that was critiquing Taylor Swift as the choice for the class, making the argument that many other music artists would have made as good or better a choice, and that Taylor Swift was not yet sort of classic enough to be the choice. There was a little bit also of a, of course everyone likes Taylor because she's a pretty blonde white woman, and there are many other people you could choose. And that kind of criticism, I think, is valuable and reminds us of the potential for this class to cover a lot more ground. There are absolutely other music genres and artists that we could talk about, and I hope that in the future we will. The only other piece that I can think of that came to our attention was there was a letter to the editor in the Tampa Bay Times about how it was sort of an embarrassing thing for USF to be doing. For back in the day, professors taught real things like Shakespeare and Milton and Jonathan Swift and the Bronte sisters, and what is the world coming to now that we're using our intellectual power to teach Taylor Swift. And I love that article, or that letter to the editor, so much because, unbeknownst to this man in Tarpon Springs who wrote it, I am a Miltonist. Dr. Cook, Jessica, teaches the 18th century, including Jonathan Swift, and Michelle is a Victorianist who knows all about the Bronte sisters, and we do teach these classes. Yeah. And so unlike the student letter, that letter, I think, just kind of proves the point that when you know a lot about the literary canon and the literary tradition, it actually becomes that much easier to put Taylor Swift within it and talk about her relationship to these other writers. Right.
Yeah. Did you guys have anything to add to that?
No, and I think what Emily was saying about the valid criticism that came from the student newspaper, I think part of it is there are classes on music that are offered around USF. Like there's a class on African American music being offered out of the School of Interdisciplinary Global Studies, I think, in the spring. It's just that those classes aren't, I mean, Taylor Swift, anytime you attach her name to something, it gets a lot of attention, whether you're intending it to or not. We were honestly kind of taken aback by some of the media attention that the class got, because after all, it is just an English class. So I do think part of it is there are sometimes some options on the table that just unfortunately don't get maybe publicized as much as this class did, because this is kind of the Taylor Swift effect. She is a very powerful brand in and of herself.
Right. And I wanted to touch on that a little bit, especially Michelle. When I first sat in on the class, you were the one who opened it, and you spoke about some of the tortured poets in keeping with this class's theme. So I wanted to ask, with the class being an English class, it's a literature class, correct? Mm-hmm. Okay. So how is the class structured? How is Taylor Swift brought into it? And then what do you cover? Like, I know that today we spoke a little bit about poetry, since the theme was the Tortured Poets Department. So yeah, give me a little bit about how the class is structured and what you guys teach.
We've had a pretty varied range of topics. Mm-hmm. And we also have tossed up whether we all teach together or whether we take an entire class on by ourselves. So I think there's been 5 days, or like we've had, 15 lecture days, or 14, something like that. And 5 of them, we've split the class up like you saw today, where we each talked for 20 or 25 minutes or so. But the rest of the days, each of us prepared 2 or 3 lectures where we talked for the full 75 minutes on our own. And we, decided those topics for those days in conjunction with each other and made sure that they would all fit in together.
Right.
But they were on like a really diverse group of topics. So we started off by putting Taylor Swift in the very first day, we put her in the context of just like being a poet in general, right. like legitimizing studying her as a poet, talking about her language as poetic, talking about slant rhymes, which she's really amazingly good at. And just saying this is how you study her as a poet.
Right.
And then we all talked together on that. And then the second class, we put her in the tradition of women poets in particular, starting all the way with Sappho, the ancient Greek poet, and bringing her all the way up into the late 20th century.
Right.
And from there, we had I think like 9 weeks in a row where we each were talking on our own in those 75 minutes. And I won't remember the order, but I did the Byronic hero for one. I did Swift and childhood for another, based on the concept largely of romantic childhood. And then just last week, actually, my husband and I did a lecture together. Only time we had a guest speaker, because he's in digital marketing.
Right.
And so we did this thing where we collaborated and talked about Swift as like a savvy Victorian novelist, going back to the Brontes actually in some ways, and talking about like all her re-recordings and like marketing strategies in the context of 19th century publishing.
Right.
And then we also talked about both folklore and tortured poets as albums, like studying poetry collections in their own right. And maybe we could, I've talked about mine, but maybe we could each go around and say some of the other topics we've covered to give a fuller picture.
Sure. I spoke about the Gothic romance, and then the concept of the male muse.
And yeah, after we did those 2 sort of introductory lectures, the ones that I gave were one on time and temporality in Swift's lyrics that kind of dovetailed with Michelle's course on childhood. I gave a lecture on queer readings of Taylor Swift, kind of playing off the the fan lore about, is Taylor queer, the Gaylor theory, talking about the difference between that and what it means to do like queer critique from a literary standpoint. And then what was the other one I did? Oh, yeah, Renaissance. My first one, since I'm a Renaissance professor, I gave a lecture on Taylor Swift and the concept of Renaissance self-fashioning, kind of this idea that really came to the fore in the Renaissance, that it was possible for each individual person to sort of make a public persona for themselves, and that you weren't just stuck in the box you were born in. You could, change what you wore and what you wrote and how you acted, and kind of make yourself a public figure to be consumed by other people. So starting with that kind of Renaissance concept, but then applying it to what Taylor has done so well throughout her career.
Right. Thank you. And speaking of what we're wearing, I see that you guys are dressed absolutely fantastically in your Tortured Poets outfits. I know we spoke about this a little bit earlier, but tell me about incorporating fashion into this class and using that to express yourself in the context of Taylor Swift.
Yeah, we wanted the class to be creative and fun. And so we decided, since for the Taylor Swift Eras tour that's been so popular, and fans show up dressed as like a particular era representing like 1989 or Debut or Lover, that she has so many albums, we could spread them across the semester and have a different style theme for each week. And so we've been dressing up each week according to that week's style theme, but a lot of the students have as well. I don't think I've ever seen as many cowboy boots like at USF as the 2 weeks that one was Debut, one was Fearless. So yeah, it's been a real source of, I think, creativity and fun for everybody.
Yeah, what were your favorite outfits, just really quick? Any ones that stand out to you guys?
This week is pretty good.
This week is pretty great. I feel really good about this set. And then my other favorite week has got to be when we all dressed up as the witches from the Willow music video. We all got matching like mustard colored gold dresses and blue hooded cloaks and came carrying these like moon orbs to class. And that was all Michelle's idea. It was really peak brilliance. We had a great time.
That was a real triumph.
That was a great one.
A lot of late night messages for me with, guys, what about this idea? Our course posters were from that too. Like, no one ever says no to me, and I think it shows. But I kind of love that, because I think it's just one of the many ways we work well together. I have these wild ideas, and they're like, yes, we would love to walk around campus with moon orbs. Yes, 1,000 times.
Yeah, well, it seems like it worked out great.
It did.
And we advertised the course by, before it started, we all had a different era. Michelle was Lover, Jessica was Evermore, and I was Reputation. And we did like a photo shoot with us dressed as Taylor from that era and made publicity posters out of it. So this full commitment to the bit started very early.
Oh, well, I'm glad to hear. And I think, as I said, it turned out great. So I think that's it for me. I wanted to ask you guys if there's anything you wanted to add, any final thoughts, something that we haven't touched on.
One thing that occurred to me earlier in talking about, whether we call ourselves Swifties, I also probably wouldn't have prior to this class, but the experience of being in community with Jessica and Michelle and all of our students, I think that term really feels like it applies in a new way now, because having this class has meant being part of like a really special intellectual and cultural community.
Yeah, agree. I think Taylor Swift is well known for her love of collaboration and working with people that she finds that very creatively generative. And I think I felt the same way getting to do this class with the two of them, that it's been really fun to collaborate.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like I'm somehow ending up with the last word again. And last time that happened, an hour ago, I cried at the end of class. But I don't want to do that again. But
feel free to.
No, the idea of community has been really important, both with Jessica and Emily and with the students. And it's been really great to watch the students grow in their analytical abilities. My first comments were about legitimizing what it is that they love, but in doing that, they've also grown stronger as writers and thinkers and been exposed to so many things that they wouldn't otherwise have been exposed to, right? They wouldn't have known who many of these writers were before, and they've learned how to communicate and think more deeply. And I love that Taylor Swift was the thing that brought them to that. And I'm thrilled that she was the vehicle for that.
And I'm sure I spoke to a couple of students after, and I think they feel the same way. So thank you guys so much for coming in. Thank you for teaching this class. It was lovely chatting with you. And yeah.
Thank you, Mahika.
Thank you.
Of course.